Hey guys, Brian here from Better Chess Training, and in today's video, I'd like to share a classic master game from the early 19th century, and featuring a player, Johannes Zukertort, who was one of the strongest players in the late 19th century, and probably most famous for being the first loser of a world championship match in the first world championship match with Wilhelm Steinitz. But of course, he was a very good player, and I found this very instructive game, and I'd like to share it with you. So let's get right into it. It starts off e4, c5, the Sicilian defense, and then we have knight to c3. This could lead to a lot of things, including the like the Grand Prix attack with f4. And of course, the knight to f3 would lead into the open Sicilian. But here we're actually going to transpose into that anyway. Knight to c6, knight to f3, a6. Okay? d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. So we are transposed into an open Sicilian. And after e6, I believe this is called the Paulson variation. We now have bishop to e2, which is the one of the most common moves. Knight takes c6 is also played. Bishop to e2, getting ready to castle. And here, knight to b4 is played. Now, there's this is not a great move. It has been played a few times, but if you can, I'm going to give you a chance here to take a look at, this was a variation that wasn't played in the game, but what would be a good way to reply to this? Go ahead and pause the video for a moment and see if you can figure out what would be good for white here. Okay, here white has a nice little tactic with knight takes c6, and if b takes c6, queen to d4. We're hitting the g7 square as well as the bishop. So we're getting this queen move in with tempo, and there's two main ways that black can respond. Both of them lead to a nice edge for white, and let me just go through those quickly. The worst of the two is to take here on c3. And then after queen takes c3, white might want to develop to cover that g7 square as well. Then we can push e5, knight to d5, a nice natural move for black. But after queen to g3, we have a nice initiative here. And this is kind of difficult to meet. I mean, if he plays, for example, if he just castles into it, which would be a bad move, then bishop to h6. And at the very least, we might be winning the exchange here. But this is already very dangerous. For example, g6, we might not even, we might just go h4 and just try to blow black out of the water. Okay? So going back, the better option here would be to drop the bishop back to protect. But look, it's now undeveloping a piece that was developed, and white can just get a very nice lead in development. Bishop to f4, knight to f6, and then just castles. And we can see here that white is pretty much fully developed, while black has one piece developed. So this is a nice edge for white. However, this was not played by Zukertort. And here he castled instead, which is a logical move as well. By the way, let's just go back here real quick. This idea of bishop to b4 is just premature here. It comes out again in the main line of this variation with queen to c7. And the idea here is the queen now is covering this square as well, so that if he takes, and he takes, first off, we don't have that tempo with queen to d4. But also, if we go knight to f6, and we're going to see in the game what happens here with this knight to f6 move, we don't have e5. After knight takes, e takes, there's no e5 move right now. And after bishop to e3, now bishop to b4. This is still good for white. White still has a slight lead in development and a little more space. So this is preferable for white, but not horrible for black, if that makes sense. Okay, let's go back to the game. Okay, white castle, knight to f6, and here we start to see the problem of this setup for black. White takes on c6, and after taking back with the b pawn, he plays e5. Now, first off, we're attacking the knight, of course, but also we're going to get this nice grip on the d6 square. And as you'll see shortly, this is going to lead to a very nice game here for white. Okay, b takes c3, or bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and knight to d5. So white or black does get this hit on the c3 square or on the c3 pawn, but queen to d4 covers it, and it's very good for white right now. Okay, a5 is played, and I think the idea here is that he wants to develop his bishop, maybe trade off this bishop, just trying to activate his pieces. But white gets a very nice move in here, and again, I would encourage you to pause the video for a moment and see what you would play here for white. Okay, here white plays a very thematic move when these dark squares are weakened, and that's bishop to a3. And what does that do? Well, it prevents the black king from castling, and also it just takes control of some of these key squares. So it's hard for the queen to develop. It's hard to advance this pawn, for example, in a pawn break. Hard to gain space with this pawn. And it also just puts a lot of pressure on black's position in general, since black is now having some difficulty developing. Okay, f5 is played. Trying to, the idea here is that black is going to develop his rook by putting his king on f7 and then developing his rook this way. They call this castling by hand, and it's black's trying to find some way to get counterplay. Now, it would be a huge mistake for white to take here, because after queen takes f6, now black is getting some counterplay. Okay, maybe not. It's maybe not equal. I think white might still be better here because of his edge of development, but black is definitely getting back in the game. As you can see, this e5 pawn was very strong. This e5 pawn is very strong for white, and we should not trade it for this f pawn. So instead, what we're going to be getting into now is, as we're moving into the middle game, actually what I want you to think about this throughout the game is one of the things we want to do strategically in chess is we want to look at the quality of our pieces. And we want to look at what are our good pieces and how can we make them better? What are our bad pieces? How can we trade them off or improve them? And similarly, can we trade off our opponent's good pieces? Can we hinder our opponent's good pieces? And then can we leave him with bad pieces? This is going to be sort of a theme running throughout this game, but we should think about this in all of our games. So check this out. White is going to play very logically from this point on. Rook A to B1. Just taking this open file and, again, improving a piece that otherwise is not doing much on A2 at the moment, or on A1. King to f7. Again, he's going to be castling by hand, as we talked about. And now c4, hitting this knight. We could also just continue with our plan of general improvement of our pieces with Rook F2d1. That's what I thought that would have been good as well. And I think it is good as well. We don't need to rush. White has kind of a strategic and positional advantage right now. So he doesn't need to push the issue too much. But c4 is also a good move. Knight to b4. And here we need to make a decision. How are we going to defend these pawns. He's attacking the A2 and the C2 pawns. And again, just trying to keep you guys active. Go ahead and pause the video and try to decide what you would do here. Okay, well, some of you might have thought, well, maybe I will trade off this knight for this bishop. And this isn't such a great idea. After A takes B4, Rook takes B4, Rook takes B4, we now see that now we're the ones who are a little bit in having some weaknesses in our position, and we see that we've improved black's piece here. So that's not what we want to do, although again, maybe we could argue that white is a little better here. Instead, we're going to defend our pawns here with rook to b2. This has the added benefit is that maybe at some point we might want to double on the b file. Okay, queen to e7 was played. This is actually the best move by black. I was trying to figure out why, and the only thing that I could come up with is that he's definitely planning c5 next to just solidify on this knight here. Now, c3 is played. Of course, attacking the pinned piece is always something we want to do, but black plays c5. Okay, of course, we don't want our queen to be taken, so white moved his queen to e3. Queen to d2 would have also been pretty good, as well as queen to f4, but queen to e3 works as well. And black plays a clever move here. Bishop to b7, leaving this knight on pre. Of course, well, maybe not of course, but we can't take it yet, because if we take it, and here again, just take a few seconds and decide how you're going to take back here for black. I'll give you a couple seconds. Okay, it's important here that we do not take with the C pawn. And the reason why is that this rook can just move out of the way, either to b1 or b3, and then we cannot take because it is pinned here, and we're going to lose material. But if black takes with the a pawn, this bishop is trapped, and now we're going to be giving back. So after rook to b3, then we have, well, probably the best way to take here would be with the rook. Then after trading off rooks, if we look at the situation now, this rook is going to get developed somewhere. Black has equalized here. So what are we going to do here? So bishop to b7 was very clever. What black does here is he plays rook to d2. So now we are threatening to take here on b4 because this bishop can escape. And so now the black knight is forced to go back to a6. Now let's take a quick inventory of the pieces. Like we talked about earlier, I talked about understanding good pieces and bad pieces. If we look at the minor pieces, we see that this bishop is doing okay right now. We're putting pressure here on the c5 pawn. This bishop is not quite so active. This bishop is pretty good, bearing down on the long diagonal. And this knight is pretty terrible, with no real places to go. And you can see here all of these squares are being covered. So it might be very difficult to really get anywhere useful. So we're doing pretty well. Let's see how we continue to improve our position. Here, rook to d6 was played by white. This is an excellent move. It fixes this pawn weakness, and you're going to see later, white is going to put some pressure here on d7, and also it puts some pressure on the 6th rank, kind of limiting the scope of black's pieces. Another move I thought of when I was first looking at this game was rook f to d1 with the same idea, and I think that also works. White has such a good positional advantage that he has a few options here, okay? Okay, rook to d6, so rook h to c8. So, of course, d7 is not being threatened yet, so black plans on defending by putting his rook on the 7th rank. Rook f to d1, again, doubling up, putting pressure here on d7. And a rook to c7. Okay. Excuse me. Here, I want you to take a moment and figure out what we're going to do for white next. Again, pause the video and think of strategically what would you do, again, with this overall theme of how can we improve our pieces or how can we hinder or trade off black's active pieces. Okay, here white made an excellent move. I hope you guys found it. Bishop to f3. As we talked about a couple minutes ago, this is probably white's worst piece, and this is black's best piece. So naturally, it's a great idea to trade them off. Bishop takes f3. Queen takes f3. Of course, we're attacking this rook. So the rook moves here to a7 in order to further defend here, but also we need to keep in contact with this knight because our rook is pressuring it. Okay, rook to b1. So d7 is protected for now, so the idea here is let's take the other open file here and continue to, again, make our pieces better. Another move here that's okay, but not the best, is bishop to c1. Again, now this c5 is adequately protected, maybe being able to now put some pressure on the king side at some point. But rook to b1, I think, is the best play. And here, white actually has a very good idea, and that is to just play rook to b6 and just take this knight. By the way, this could also be accomplished with rook to b6 directly, and then rook to d6. This actually is slightly better, and I was trying to figure out why, and then I kind of analyzed a little on my own and saw this variation. So here, if we do this, let me show you the original in the game. Oops. So as was played in the game, black can respond rook to c6. And then if we trade rooks, of course we're going to win this pawn here, and so this is good, but our rook is not as well placed. However, if we go back here, rook to b6, and then black tries the same maneuver, well, now we have this very nice rook here on d6 instead. A very slight difference. So let me show you that. So rook here on b1 versus the rook here on d6. That's the only difference between those two variations. But it kind of shows you a little bit of sometimes when I look at two ways to accomplish the same goal, you want to look at why one is slightly better than the other. In this case, they're both good moves. They're both winning for white. But just understanding that will help you make better decisions in your own games. Okay. Okay, from here, black played queen to d8. Again, white's threat is to play rook to b6. So the queen gives some protection to the b8 square so that the knight can retreat. Well, now, again, white improves his pieces. Bishop to c1. Look, all of these pieces are over here on the queen side. And now we're going to start aiming at the king side. Here, black should have played something like queen to a8, trying to trade off queens, trying to get his pieces active, maybe getting it over to e4. But he made a mistake here at g6. This is sort of one of those moves. He doesn't really have an active plan, so he kind of plays this maybe developing here to try to protect this and also preventing any types of checks here. But look at the weakness of these dark squares. I mean, these are all going to play into white's strategy later. And so white, so let's just take a step back here. All of white's pieces are actively placed. They're all doing something. You know, for example, the queen and rook are covering the b7 square, so black cannot challenge. This bishop now can aim at these squares. This rook is just holding down the whole black position, preventing any breaks here with the d pawn. And so we need to come up with sort of the next phase here. And Zukertort shows us how to do this with g4. Okay? So now we want to start breaking into black's position. Okay, queen to a8 comes now, and Here, we definitely want to avoid this trade because we are the ones that are attacking. These pieces are all useless, so we are using our pieces to attack. And so white avoids. We queen to h3. Of course, attacking h7, so queen to g or king to g8 is played. And here we follow through and we take here. Now, here, black could take with the g pawn, but this gets very dangerous with rook to d8, just playing to swing on over here and attack on the king side. Queen to e4 is another option that I looked at, but here after f6 we can see just this how this can just be pretty bad here. Let me see. I did a couple moves here of analysis. For example, queen to e1 check, king to g2, queen to e4 check, queen to f3. And then if he takes, we're just going to checkmate him. f7 check, king to f8. Then bishop to h6 check will lead to checkmate. I'll show you a couple here and here. Or here, 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 and then here. Okay? So queen to e4 seems like an active move, but is just not enough. Okay, so g takes f5, not such a great move, nor is queen to e4, so e takes f5. And now here, I'd like you again, and I'm asking you these questions because I want you to think about these games or think about these positions and see what you would do. So pretend this is your game. You feel that you're winning. You're on the attack. How do you continue it here? Again, pause the video for a moment if you want, and I'll give you a few seconds. Here, white plays the best move, or probably the best move here. Rook b to b6. And here's the threat. He's just going to break open this king side and attack with his pieces. Black's pieces are too far away to defend or not in the right position to defend. Okay, rook to c6 is played. Okay, rook b takes b6, d takes e6. And here, there's a few good moves, all based on threatening this fork. And I'm going to show you some of the moves that weren't played. Queen to h4 would have done the job, as well as queen to d3. But Zukertort plays a very nice move, getting his other piece active, and that's rook to g5. And after h6, of course, rook to d8 check would work, but even more efficient here is rook to g6 check. And here, black resigned. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video. I think studying these early masters like Morphy and Anderson, Zukertort, and Steinitz is a great thing to do. The reason why is that these masters understood the strategic concepts that we're trying to master and learn ourselves. Things like taking open lines, improving the quality of our pieces, space, but the development of defense and counterplay or creating complications was not as well developed back then. So you can see what happens when an opponent does not play the optimal defense, like we saw in this game today, how we can build up our position and take those advantages and push it towards a victory. And that's something that is very difficult to see sometimes in modern play. And so because, of course, the modern masters are very good at creating counter chances and complicating the position. And all of these, it's hard to see these strategic elements in a pure form because they're all intertwined, as the modern masters are very good at using them all together. So I would encourage you to check out, especially the games of Morphy. He was just great, of course. And I'm a big fan. And so with that in mind, I'll put a Morphy playlist right there. And of course, if you are not subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button down below. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.